Hey folks, Faz here. So today we are once again talking about effort. So first of all, I think it's a difficult conversation to have because if you are trying to get people to work hard, people either think they're working hard. So if you tell them they're not, they get defensive. Or others understand they're already not working hard. So if you tell them to work hard, they go, yeah, fair enough. Those kind of topics don't really add anything to the whole YouTube space. This is talking about various factors in your life which prevent you from working hard and how to kind of visualize that. So I want to just introduce to you, first of all, the analogy that I'm going to use to build this discussion to help you guys understand exactly what I'm talking about, because it's quite a nuanced point. And I need you guys to understand what I mean, because I'm not just sat here shouting, work harder. I don't think that's useful. The analogy is this. Let's say you start your car with the handbrake on. Okay. Now, what happens is your car will rev just like normal. They'll try and start, but it won't be able to go as fast as it would if the handbrakes were off. Now, the analogy is that the revs in this case is how hard you're working. The handbrake in this analogy are external factors which may not necessarily be under your control, which affect how hard you can push. And if you push to failure in a given set, you might have reps left in the tank because these handbrakes affect the output. The speed in this analogy is how many reps you do. Okay, so if I'm going along the motorway with my handbrake on, I might be maxing the car out, but I only reach, say, 50 miles an hour because I've got the handbrake on. Now, in training, the handbrakes represent all those external factors like stress, poor nutrition, even genetics, which we don't necessarily have control over either in the moment or at all. There might be nothing you can do about work commitments. You've got to work, you've got to put food on the table. So it's an important topic to discuss, and it's not just, hey, work harder. There's more to it than that. Do you guys understand where I'm coming from? There are various external factors in life. Some of them are external, some of them are more under our control, but there are certainly factors which affect the output, but it's not how hard we work. Like, we are still working as hard as we can, but those external factors affect what we get out of the gym, how many reps we can do. Before I move on, because I really want you guys to understand what I'm saying here, let's give you an extreme example. Let's say I came into the gym and I was hungover, okay? And I pick a weight where I can normally do it for 10 reps. Now, because I'm hungover, even though I train to failure, I only get 6 reps. Well, that hangover represents a pretty strong handbrake on my output. I'm revving the engine as hard as I can, but the output is a lot slower in speed. Same way that if I'm in the gym and I'm hungover, I'm trying as hard as I can in the moment, but I'm only able to get a lot less reps than I would. So that means when I hit failure, there were reps left. My muscles hadn't actually hit failure. And let's say, for example, you hooked up my arms or chest or whatever to some electrodes which stimulated my muscle. You get the idea. There might still be reps there, but it's outside of my control in that instant because I'm coming into that session with a less than ideal set of circumstances. Now, the hangover is an extreme example, but every single one of life's external factors represents a handbrake which prevents us from reaching those additional reps which we might get if we were fully rested or without stress, without kids, without work, all that stuff. So I think I've explained fully what I'm talking about. Now, in the next section, I want to discuss some of life's handbrakes. What do we have control over? What don't we have control over? Before I do that, like the video if you're here with me so far. Subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you want to talk about coaching, hit me up. There's a link down below. So let's discuss some common handbrakes that we have in life. So first, the big one is work. We would all love to live like a Russian weightlifter and lift weights all day long, have massages and whatnot, but it's not possible. We have to put money on the table. We have to work. Everyone does. Now, so work commitments and time constraints is probably the big one, right? Now, for a lot of us, work commitments just are not under our control. We have to work. We have to put money on the table. So it's not something we can necessarily change. So I think the very first handbrake of work, it's probably not something we can change. And that's just something we have to accept. We do not live life like a pro bodybuilder who is sponsored, and all he has to do is make some social media posts, do some video recording, but he doesn't have a regular 9 to 5. So for a lot of us, that is a handbrake we cannot change. And I wanted to start with that one because it's important to remember some of these things will affect our training choices later on when we discuss the implications of this later in the video. The next thing is sleep patterns and rest and recovery. This is something which I guess we have mostly control over, but when it comes to things like kids, maybe we have less control. I like to think though that most people have more control over this than they think they have. Okay, let's try not to use things as an excuse. I do find though that in talking to some people, they wear that as more of a badge of pride. I've got kids, I'm getting no sleep for the next 5 years. Yeah, don't give up. I see that as a very common cope. Not saying there's nothing to it, there is, but let's not continue to use it as an excuse. Let's try and make the best of a bad situation. Next thing is stress management and mental well-being. I think this is something people are just notoriously terrible at. This comes in kind of two groups of people. People who are aware of stress management, aware of the effects it can have, and try to at least do something about it. Like maybe they practice meditation, maybe they time block periods of the day to do something which calms them down. Like one of my friends, he wakes up really early in the morning, he walks and he reads the Bible. That's what works for him. That's his thing. Fair enough. I know another guy, he journals his thoughts. That's the thing for him. But something which allows you to calm your mind and relax it. I think one of the main culprits with stress is this thing here, your mobile phone. It's one of the biggest culprits of stress because I've been through a period of time recently where I've taken off all my social media apps on my phone. Just don't have anything on there anymore. No Instagram, no Facebook, no Reddit, no nothing. Now, what that does, the effect it has is quite interesting because generally speaking, I didn't know I was doing this. And most of you who still have apps on your phones won't even realize you're doing this. But during certain portions of the day, I would look at my phone and I would spend 30 seconds, 45 seconds on my phone. Now, that was in between tasks, or maybe something I was thinking about sparked a memory where I wanted to look at my phone and give that quick dopamine hit of scrolling through nonsense. You're not even aware you really do it, right? But it just happens. Now, taking away social media apps gave me a lot more thinking time. And those mixed up, muddled up thoughts that you don't necessarily have time to deal with during the course of a day, they're just stress you hold on to. If you get rid of this like dopamine hit every single time you need it, it gives you room and space to actually think about your thoughts and organize them during the course of the day. So I find by the end of the day, I'm a lot less wound up because I've had time during the day to actually think about what's going on. As I say, it's something you won't appreciate until you do it because most people don't realize they're doing it. I didn't either. If, for example, most people who do a 9 to 5, they work 8 hours a day, they think they're just hard at work all day. Actually, the amount of actual focus work they do is probably about 3 hours. A lot of that time is spent just going from task to task, diverting your attention to other little things, looking out the window, whatever it is, and you don't realize you're doing it, but there is so much productivity lost. But it still causes you all the stress of if you're doing that activity. So the analogy that I use when I'm talking about this is dieting. Like if you diet for 12 months, it's a long time to diet. But let's say during the course of the 12 months, you might go off plan every weekend. Every weekend you binge, right? A couple of days a week, you don't really track your calories. So the diet just lasts for 12 months to a year. You guys probably know, not you guys, I'm sure you guys are all very good at dieting, but you guys probably know somebody in your life who's just chronically dieting all the time. That's what they do. But the problem is they still gain all the diet fatigue as if they were dieting all year, but they get none of the results. So that's very similar to people working and just looking at the phone all the time. They're not completely working, but they still get all the fatigue from work. And so they think they are. But again, unless you do the activity of getting rid of all these social media phones and not going on your phone, it's it can be enlightening. There was a guy in my comments on the last video talking about how he went for, I think it was 2 weeks, he said, without talking. And he said it gave him a lot of time to just think through his thoughts. And it's a very similar concept. So anyway, stress management. Two groups of people. One group who actively try and manage their stress. The other group who ignore the topic, are usually quite stressed, but think they're okay. Nobody is without stress. Fourth thing is nutrition and its impact on energy levels. This we can all improve on. So one of the things I talk about in this channel quite a lot is nutrition, and how you can get better nutrition to improve your ability to work harder in the gym. It has a direct relationship. That's a big thing. And a lot of that is under your control. The last thing I want to talk about is genetic predispositions. Now, for a lot of you, most of this won't be in your control. For a lot of you, you might not have a genetic predisposition to push really hard in the gym. There are people who are just animals from day one. It happens. Typically, what I find is guys who start off life with very fast twitch kind of sports like sprinting tend to be very good as lifters. One of my friends in the hometown that I grew up in, he was a gymnast when he was a kid and just a ridiculously good physique, able to push himself really hard. One of my best friends, he's a top powerlifter here in the UK. He was a sprinter when he was younger. You know, these things make a difference. I mean, myself, I played a lot of football, a lot of soccer when I was younger. That made a difference to my training initially. So it all helps. Now, if you come from let's say a very sedentary background or a long distance running background, maybe that's your genetic proclivity. Again, it's going to be a situation where, let's say you push to failure, you may still have 4 or 5 in the tank. And so you have to constantly practice pushing to failure. And on top of that, I think you have to acknowledge the fact that there may be reps left in the tank. This is true for everyone, but it's even more true for you. So again, not you guys watching, I'm sure you guys all do very well, but there are people out there, okay? So I just want to finish off this section by emphasizing that some of this stuff is not under our control. Some of this stuff is. But either way, it's worth being humble and acknowledging that even if you're working as hard as you currently can, there is more there and you can push harder. You can get more out of your sessions. And on that topic, I just want to quickly do a quick segue into the myth of true failure. So this idea that if you do take a set to failure, that's all your muscles have got left. A lot of times you've got 1 or 2 reps left, even if you fail. And sort of the way that I can explain this is, let's say you go to 1 rep in reserve, but you are like hyped up on caffeine, you've got your hard style blaring, you've got literally Tom Platz just screaming in your ear, but you stop 1 step short of failure. Now, do you think you're going to get more or less reps than a guy who walks into the gym hungover and he does 1 set when he's hungover and he fails? Who's going to be working harder? Probably you are, even though you're 1 rep in reserve, because the environment is set up so that you can work harder. So this idea of train to failure being like the most you can do is bullshit, guys. Like, you can do more, because the mentality that you approach that set with determines how hard you can push. So if you push to failure on a set, it doesn't mean that's everything. And this is something I see relatively commonly, guys on social media will say, look, I pushed that set to failure. There is no rep slowdown. There is no shaking. There is no sign that they are anything close to failure. And we know rep slowdown is a clear indicator that you are starting to actually truly fail. If you get none of that, I don't care if you genuinely failed, that's not failure. So there is this myth of true failure. And it's something that you have to be humble enough to admit that it's a thing and it affects you, because it affects everyone. I'm not the perfect trainer either. After 25 years, I still find ways that I can train harder. I still want to level up, and that's part and parcel of the process. But if your mind is closed to the possibility that you could train harder, then you're never going to improve. You're never going to take that next step up. You're never going to level up. So you have to be open to the possibility that the current level of effort you're putting forward might still be leaving a few reps in the tank, because again, life has handbrakes, and one of those handbrakes is mental, internal. The rest maybe are out of your control, but certainly there are things to do in your control. So that is the myth of true failure. And just to summarize that, it's this idea that failure isn't an indicator that you had no reps left. Failure is just where you stopped, where your body decided it had enough in the moment. That can be bettered by your mental effort, but it can also be bettered by the environment you're in and you've created for yourself. Very important to remember, because it has implications for how you train, which takes us on to our next topic, and that is the very thorny discussion around RAR. This can be a very emotionally charged discussion. I would say my current thoughts on RAR is the majority of you should not use an RAR approach. Point blank, don't. And I hope that you're starting to get to grips with why I think that. It's because the handbrakes of life, to go back to the analogy at the beginning, the handbrakes of life are already going to keep you at a certain level of RAR. The handbrakes of life may already have you at 2 RAR. So if we tag on more reps in reserve, what are we effectively doing then? We might end up 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 reps in reserve. The last thing a father of 3 who has poor sleep, is generally stressed, needs is to hear about RAR and decide to take everything to RAR. Because you know what? It's those guys who find these approaches appealing. Because they're like, yeah, maybe if I go a bit easier, and you know what? This guy says I can go easier, I can keep 2 reps in reserve. What you guys don't realize is you're already 2 to 5 to 10 reps in reserve. And it's a difficult conversation to have. And because I'm trying to have this conversation without directly calling people out. I don't want to do that, but I do want to help you guys. So I've taken time to explain this in a way that I'm trying not to call you out, because I find that when I call people out, they get defensive. And then it's like their brain is varnish proof to the idea of working hard, because they're already thinking to themselves, I've got kids, sleep's crap, I'm stressed out, and Faz is telling me I'm a wuss. I'm not saying that. You have to understand, I'm saying that life has handbrakes on all of us. I'm not saying you're not working hard enough. What I'm saying is that if you decide to do an RR approach, you're even further away from failure, to the point where it might be ineffective. That's such a big thing to understand. So for that reason, I'm not a fan of RR approaches. Now, typically speaking, RR in itself is not a bad way to train. But the point is, you have to do it within the confines of a specific RR approach. You can't just take a regular routine with moderate to low volumes and decide to tag 2 or 3 RAR on top of that. It's going to be a disaster. Most of the guys who really emphasize RAR approaches, they train a lot with high frequency, high volume, and also pretty good recovery times, some of them on anabolics. You've got to think to yourself, is that you? Or are you doing your damnness to actually just get some stimulus because life is just dragging you down? You've got so many handbrakes on. Do you get what I'm saying? It's not an ego thing. I'm not calling you out. I'm saying that life is fucking you, basically, and your genetics are as well. So you have to do what you can. The only thing that's left under your control is getting to the gym and training brutally as hard as you can on that day, on that set. Okay. So that kind of nicely leads on to the final section, and that is taking control. What can you do? What can you do? I think my general recommendations are for most people to train everything either to failure or as close to failure as you can while still being safe, or beyond failure. So let's take those one by one. Let's take that as close as you can to failure while still being safe. Let's take that first. So that would be probably your barbell lifts, okay, like your squat, your bench, your deadlift. If you've got a couple of sets of squats to do, you probably don't want to fail. Because if you fail, you're going to have to re-rack the weight and all this kind of stuff, right? So if you've got a couple of spotters to help you, fine. But generally speaking, squats, maybe just go until the next rep you might fail. Use your best judgment. Same with deadlifts. Because if you fail on deadlifts, the last thing that's going to go is your lower back. Probably not a good idea. If you fail on bench, you don't want to get crushed in the rack, okay? So everything else, though, like machines, dumbbells, cables, fail. You may as well. Now, where it's safe to do so, go beyond failure as well. I know I'm kind of taking it up a notch here, but again, remember, life's handbrakes. You're probably still not a failure. If I fail leg extensions, when I fail leg extensions, I'll carry on doing some partial reps. I'll maybe get some negatives. You guys have seen videos of me doing chest supported rows where I'll get some forced reps. That's a very, very regular occurrence for me now. Whether it be forced reps, partials, drop sets, like a mechanical drop set, maybe a superset, something, an agonistic superset, like maybe leg extensions into sissy squats, for example. All you have under your control is trying to get the most out of that set. The rest of it, what's happened the week before, your genetics, all the rest of it, in that moment, nothing else is under your control, and all the other factors are handbrakes on how hard you can work. Remember that. So when you're in the gym, The only thing that you have control over is getting the most out of your set. So get the most out of your set. Try to overcome those handbrakes as best you can, because for some of you, those handbrakes are going to be permanent. So you have to do the best you can. Okay. So I'm just going to conclude this before I switch it off. All right. So first of all, the analogy is to do with the handbrakes of life. Okay. If you want to quote that, like that's what we're talking about, the handbrakes of life. These are all these external factors which prevent you from getting the most out of your sets. They will mean that even if you fail, you've still got reps left. If we were to hook you up to some electric machine, or if I was to like mind control you and take over your brain, you might have some more reps left. But on the day, they will prevent you from going all the way. So as a result, the one thing that's under your control is to take every set just as hard as you can. That means training either to the point where you're going to failure, or it's at least as hard as it's safe to do, and even beyond failure. That would be my recommendation, because life will impose handbrakes on you. All right, folks, I think I'm going to call that there because I think I've said enough. But as I say, I don't really find those videos where the content creator just shouts at you and tells you to work harder to be useful, because I'm 100% sure if you're sat here watching a video, you're probably working as hard as you can. And if you're not, you already know you're not. This is to tell you, this is something you may not have thought about. This is insidious things. This is things which are, you're trained to failure, but they're still holding you back. So all of this is to say, these are factors which are outside of your control. Do what you can in the moment to get the best out of it. And obviously work on the external factors as well. But I'm not calling anyone out here. I'm just telling you, look, do your best. Get the most out of your sets. And if you're not progressing, this is probably one of the reasons why, and it should serve as motivation to continue to try to get to the next level of effort, of intensity. Because for every time you fail, there's probably still 2 or 3 reps in the tank. It's a pretty damning realization. When you realize that, when you switch on to, that's when you really start to work hard. Okay, so be humble, work hard, and improve. Right, folks, see you in the next one.